Hey, everybody. So glad you're back to get set for sentencing with me. I just wanted to remind you that we're about to embark upon part two of my extraordinary conversation with Dr. Paul Zach. So if you haven't heard part one yet, you may be a little lost by if we just jump in on this episode. So I would suggest going back and listening to part one first and then digging into part two. The other thing is at the end of this, or the last half of this part of the podcast, is running part of my sentencing video through Dr. Zach's incredible Immersion platform, which measures in real time how engaged an audience is in story. And so this might be another one of those episodes where you'd be better off watching it on the YouTubes because it's a very visual analysis. In any event, I'll stop yapping. Let's get to it. Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. We've been talking about how we measure this, and we've been talking some about how we get into immersion, but you really have a five-step sort of model for getting into immersion during communication. Can we dig into that?
Sure, it'd be great. So this model has an acronym, so I can remember it. It's SIRTA, SIRTA. So let me go through each of those very briefly. So the first S is for staging. That is setting the platform up so that people can be immersed. So it's establishing comfort. So if again, I'm going to open hot, but this is before that. So I want to make sure that audience is comfortable. So if you're stressed out, if you're tired, if you have to pee, all that's taking bandwidth away from being immersed in the story. So it's, would you like a glass of water? Are you guys comfortable? Sort of thinking about setting the stage. So often, again, we sort of rush into that story because we want to get that story out. We're so excited about it. So this is the movie theater bringing the lights down, right? You're turning off your screens and your phones, right? That's setting the stage. So that's number one. Make sure that people are feeling psychologically comfortable in the space. And the second is creating an immersive story. So again, open hot, show genuine emotions, let that narrative relate to the goal that you want the viewer or the listener to lead to them. So you're leading them to a goal. So I can tell a story and at the end go, and this guy's awesome, please give him a life sentence. Or I can embed that individual into the story. So I guess it can be more effective if the story reflects what you want to do. So think about putting that tension. The R in SIRTA is for relevance. So there is not one universal story, although we could have a debate on that. So in the brain, when the story is relevant to me, the viewer or listener, I devote more processing power neurologically. Automatically your brain puts more processing power. So we talked about insurance. So if I'm, a 9-year-old kid watching a life insurance commercial, irrelevant. My brain's just going to flush it out. If I'm, 90-year-old person, life insurance is not really relevant for that person anymore, right? Their families all raised if they have family, on and on and on. So relevance is important. So really it's identifying the key factors for the audience. What do they care about the most, and crafting the story around that. And as you said earlier, Doug, if you want to bring back those story components, the fonts, the music, the faces, right? So reinforce that kind of first level of the story by adding second and third levels. And by the way, the more multisensory, the better, right? Music matters, location matters. All these are kind of drawn memories. I call these cultural touchstones. So if it's more relevant to me, if it looks like where I grew up, if it looks like what I'm used to, it's easier for me to empathize with that.
Interesting.
The T is for targeting. So I want to also identify who in my audience is a superfan. right? Who will influence others? So again, maybe your audience is just the judge, but certainly for juries, I'm sure lawyers must do this. Think about who can influence others in the group. So again, we have to be very careful in the courtroom. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm really speaking out of turn. But from a marketing perspective, superfans have an outside effect on the influence of marketing because they will post, they will discuss, they will see that movie or buy that product or service 3 or 4 times, right? They are really the people you want to encourage to be involved. So I think from a sentencing video, it's really thinking about that judge himself or herself, where they come from, what they've done in the past, right? Crafting that story around them and trying to create through relevance, trying to create that judge as a super fan for the video you're creating. And then lastly, something we've discussed a lot, which is the call to action. So again, have that, if at all possible, at an immersion peak. And it can be implicit or it can be explicit. You can explicitly say, this client of mine, although convicted, has so many extenuating circumstances that influenced his or her decision to commit this crime that they do not deserve to have the book thrown at them. Or it could just be bad stuff happened to this person and they made an impulsive decision to commit a crime. It could be implicit. You can just set all that up and again let that judge fill in the therefore. So do you do, I'm just curious, do you do explicit call to actions?
Most of the time we do. Sometimes it's a really tough choice because you want to ask for a sentence. You want to give the judge, your take on what you think the sentence should be. But on the other hand, there's always a fear and a tension that your ask is going to be perceived as unreasonable, like just too far over the top, that you're never, like, you're asking for, well, like I think Sonny Balwani in the Holmes case, Elizabeth Holmes gets sentenced to 11.25 years, and then he goes next and asks for probation. Well, that's a pretty tough sell unless you've got the narrative goods to sell it, which they didn't in that case, clearly. But so, yeah, you do want to make an ask, but sometimes you're worried about making the ask that you really want. And sometimes if you think your ask is really going to be perceived as cognitively, unreasonable, that it's going to take you out of the conversation, you don't make the ask. You just say, you leave it to the judge. Like, that's the mystery the judge has to solve for herself. And hopefully you've done such a good job with your presentation that you get somewhere where you're going. But for me, I like to do the ask, and I like to, if it's a wild request, I like to just say, Judge, I know this is not a usual ask, but this is not a usual case. This case is different, and here's why. Right. And just go for it. And not be afraid to go for it if I've done the work to back up, with a great story. Let me ask you this, because you are familiar with the ABT thing a little bit, I think, and that that is our narrative structure that we use. And we start with the and material. And when I think of staging, I do kind of think of the and material because it's not necessarily coming out with a bang or coming in hot, but we do these sort of terms of agreement, these non-controversial statements that bring people in and connect us and make them, we're not starting out at odds to build these walls. We're drawing people in, and then we're hitting them with the big but, which is the lean in, dopamine moment to say, okay, here we go. And that is where the heat really comes in our narrative arc. But is that and material that sets the stakes and brings us in terms of agreement, is that kind of akin to staging? Would it be?
Yeah, and also establishing relevance. So the SIRTA acronym does not necessarily need to be done in order, right? So they're all happening at once. So I think that bringing people in is making them comfortable. This is something you've done before, Judge. This case is different than what you've seen, but you're aware of this. So again, I think that staging can be done on film by just kind of having that opening, what do they call that in film? Establishing shot, right? I want to sort of establish the boundaries of what we're doing.
Yeah.
We are, right? And so I think that is a very good point, which I hadn't thought about until you said it, Doug, which is you could establish staging in the film itself. So the film doesn't have to be the James Bond, bullets flying at his feet as the movie opens. It can be just establishing where we are, right? This is
Yeah.
a person who did this, convicted of this particular crime. We're not debating that, right? But this is the beauty of common law. There are extenuating circumstances here, and we want to have some flexibility in the sentencing. And then I think making it relevant to the judge. So his or her neighborhood, or the kinds of crimes they've seen before. You have to think about it. I'm not.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, because immersion we've got that. I think we've talked that. I think we've got that, but relevance is interesting because it isn't generally, unless we're doing death penalty cases where we have a jury, it's generally an audience of one.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, it may be easy to learn your audience and figure out what's important to them and the relevance. But I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I think again is that this is an empathy. Foundationally, this relevance is an empathy thing, which is like, why is this important to me? Why would this matter to me? Or not why would it matter, but can I see myself in this story? Like if you're telling a trauma narrative, for example, this judge may not have been beaten and locked in the attic for 3 years by an abusive stepfather, and has no frame of reference for that. But if you're talking about PTSD, maybe the judge was a soldier, maybe the judge saw combat, maybe the judge, went to war, something like that, or was in a car accident, or lost a limb, or something like that. Is that where we're going with relevance?
It's really more like sympathy. It's more of a cognitive process that says, look, this is something that you are aware of, right? So I don't know if you do this, but if you had time and I guess money, doing some research on that judge to find those things out. What are the touch points that he or she cares about? Yeah, have they been in combat? Have they did they grow up as an orphan? Whatever that is. And so trying to make that mapping from that person who you want to be your super fan into this person. So the first is relevance, and then the second is to really get them to care about it. So the targeting is the empathy part. So I'm going to play on sympathy and empathy. The sympathy is, this matters to you. It's relevant to you because you know about this stuff. And so that kind of empowers the judge to go, oh yeah, I do have discretion here, right? This is something that at least is similar to my experience. I can imagine this. And then the next is to tell that story in a way that really reveals the emotion of the story itself, or of the person being convicted, who has been convicted, I guess.
I wonder if it's as simple in the relevance context as, I know you're a good person who wants to make the right decision. You just need, that's the relevance to you, that you need to make a good choice here. That's your job. I mean, I wouldn't say that to the judge, but
sure. I mean, implicitly.
Yeah. Okay. So the engaging in super fans is an interesting one to me as well, because I remember in the Fault in Our Stars example that a lot of the success of that movie was, it was a book before and they had a built-in super fan base, right, that really helped make that movie a smash hit. I'm just trying to relate that to the work that we do, because usually our clients have well, I guess that's not true. I guess we can always find super fans of our clients, somebody that could stand up and say they really are a wonderful human being and these are the great things they've done in their life. Might that be an example?
It could. I hadn't thought about that until just now. So that could be a sort of contagious effect. So this police officer, this army sergeant said, look, this guy's a great guy, right? He's not perfect. None of us are perfect, but here's some great stuff he's done. He was a veteran. He was, I don't know, helped us find these really bad criminals who are doing bad things. And he also engaged in some crime that is not great, but in general, still married. He has kids. He takes care of them. And, he's, anyway, So
Yeah.
I think that that's a very interesting point, that maybe the super fan could be within the film.
Yeah, because we don't have a big pool of people to draw from to find super fans. The judge is the one, and he's either going to be, or she's either going to be a fan of your client or a super fan of your client or not. So I guess it's just the task is to make them a super fan through your story. I mean, that's all you got, unless it's a jury. And I do think about one case where it was a death penalty case, and it was a trauma narrative. But the real thrust of the story was the family that he could have had when he was 12. He was in this therapeutic foster care program, and it was amazing. It was beautiful, and he had two foster brothers who had the same similar trauma history as he did, and they were living in that home, and they got to stay. And our client got pulled out when he was 12 because his drug addicted mom wanted to take him out of state. And so we told, and this is a good immersion, I think, now that I'm looking at it, because there were different storylines. We didn't just tell the horrible trauma narrative of our client, but we told the amazing, uplifting narratives of the two boys who stayed and what their lives became.
Right.
And one of those boys, who's now a grown man, was this big burly guy with a big bushy beard and a smile that lit up the room. And I don't get to see people's response. Usually a judge is going to watch my movie alone before sentencing, so I don't get to actually be physically present to see how people are reacting. But I was in this case. And a death penalty, there's no more somber, serious, a proceeding you could ever imagine. It's horrible on every level, right? Dark, dark, dark. But I'm watching this movie and I noticed something, that every time the big guy with the big bushy beard and the huge smile came up, there were a couple of jurors that smiled so big. They
Right.
just loved this guy. They loved him. And he had been into court live to testify too, so there was some familiarity there. But I'm like, what is happening here? We're in a death penalty case, and these jurors are lighting up. And it was at that moment, I think, when I saw a juror smile, that I knew we were not going to get the death penalty in that case. But there was a super fan thing happening with this peripheral character in the narrative.
Yeah.
I
So I would say
think.
more screen time for him, right?
Yes, right.
It does remind me of this. I'm in the Ninth Circuit, maybe you are too. This federal
Yeah.
judge, Alex Kozinski, who said, like, I believe in the death penalty, but I'm not strong enough. I think if I sentence to people, I should go and watch it. And I never have. And I thought that was such an honest statement by a judge that, okay, if you're going to impose this, then show the hell up.
Yeah, I feel like every judge and every prosecutor should spend a day in prison too. Just a day.
Yeah.
Just a day.
Yeah, I agree. Have some empathy.
Wow. Okay, well, I think we're getting close. I'd love to keep you on all day, but I know you probably have a few other things to do. But this is the thing that I want lawyers and their clients to take away, that, I'm beating this drum every day on my podcast like a dead horse. Story is everything. But you say in Immersion, and that this is, and I think this is deeply relevant, because the lawyer thing that we do is devastatingly thorough, we think wins the case. So a 70-page memo, which you could have said in 10 pages, we do that. Or, 80 character letters that are repetitive and say the same thing instead of, 5 or 10 really powerful ones. We don't quite fully grasp that. But what you said is, I'm going to quote you, the world is rapidly transforming into an experience economy. What does that mean?
Increasingly, people of all ages, but in particular younger people, are more interested in experiences than things. And so I think this is a good thing for the work you do, Doug, which is we are so available. We have such availability of entertainment that film is just something we're used to seeing all the time, from movies to YouTube, Netflix. And so that's a wonderful medium to be able to edit and create a great, tight story that tells the story of this individual that you're trying to influence the judge on the sentence. So we expect great experiences. We expect great films when we're online or in the theater, and so I think it does make people more open to the filmmaking approach for sentencing guidelines. I guess this case is judges, but I think it's got to be well done. So I think if it's poor production value, if it's discursive, as you know, we also tested really bad stories when we did this work, particularly funded by the U.S. government. We use StoryCorps, which is an NPR program where people go into a little booth and tell a story, and it's edited, but most people tell stories are not trained, and so the stories are quite discursive. And in fact, Immersion, even if it started out high, dropped off and stayed low forever. So I do think there's training that's necessary to be an effective filmmaker to influence sentencing. And I do think the work you do to inform lawyers on how to do this is very important. The last thing I would say is measurement, right? So you can use your intuition. You can read podcasts, you can listen to podcasts, read books, but ultimately, I think you've got to measure. So how about this as an action item? I'm going to use another bad word. I think the most important word in science is the word bullshit, right? Science is a systematic way to get rid of bullshit. Can you send me one of your sentencing films, and I will measure immersion, and I will send that back to you. So I'll send it to, if you don't mind, I'll send it to, a dozen, 2 dozen people, and I'll show you the brain responses. And if you want to post that on your site so other people can learn from it, it'd be great.
Oh my goodness. I am so excited. I will take you up on that in a heartbeat. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's great. So, well, let's talk about the platform just so people know exactly what it is, and so maybe they can do this too. So, it looks like there's a free section on there where you can basically put in a YouTube link, 5 minutes or less, and what happens?
We'll send it out to our panel of folks who have the app on their phones, and they'll watch that, and you get free feedback. And then it's a subscription service, so it's not that expensive. You pay for what you use. So if you want to test videos, again, we have you have to source your own brain, so you can just collect some people with either low-cost fitness wearables, which are easy purchase on Amazon, or people with Samsung or Apple Watches, whatever. And the impacts on the brain are very large for videos, and so you can get 8 or 9 people, test your video, and then get objective second-by-second feedback that will allow you to edit for higher impact. Right? That's the goal. You still got to create some video to test. The thing is, before you show it to the judge or the jury, I want to have as much impact as possible, and particularly that call to action at an immersion peak, if possible. And that call to action, again, I think in your case would be, look, the standard sentencing guideline is 7 years. This guy should get less. He should get 1 or 2 because of all the things that you've seen. But that's got to happen. You can't fully resolve that story, right? It should happen very, very quickly after the kind of crisis that is driving up that emotional response in the video.
So basically, the feedback that you're getting is real-time response to immersion. So you're going to be able to track if immersion is happening and when it's happening, right? So if it's not, okay, so if you're looking at a flat line, then I got to fix this. And
exactly.
I'm not doing
more motion, this. More close-ups,
right?
Better language. I'm exhausting people, as you said, and you need a little drone shot, or you need a little, setup so that there's a little break there.
Amazing. And that is getimmersion.com, right?
Yes, sir.
The website. So I think everybody should go check that out. 5 minutes is free for 5 minutes or less. Why wouldn't you check that out? But I'm wondering, could I take a video of myself giving a portion of my sentencing argument, my oral presentation to the judge, and use that for a video and test?
Yeah, well, you don't mind making it public.
Okay. So but you do say that when you're doing this on your own, the focus group, I think like 35 people is the magic number.
Yeah, it becomes statistically relevant at 35.
Okay. So I would have to find 35 chumps to watch my sentencing video if I was going to do this whole thing.
For sure. Or
from
we
my own.
partner, panel companies that can source those 35 people for you. So
Interesting. The website is getimmersion.com. Dr. Zach's new book is Immersion, the Science of the Extraordinary and the Source of Happiness. It's got all the stuff that we've been talking today is laid out in much greater detail. One of the things that I found so interesting, and my sister, Jordan, hi Jordan, she worked her whole career in marketing. She was in advertising. And so I was with her over Thanksgiving. I'm like, Jordy, like, you're not going to believe what I read about the Super Bowl commercial, because that's like her like Christmas and everything wrapped into one is Super Bowl just for the commercials, right? And you're not going to believe these studies they did on Super Bowl commercials. And we had such a good conversation about them. But anyway, there's so much good stuff in the book, but more importantly, there's so much good stuff that we as lawyers and clients can use to do better in our work. The other book that I read, which really kind of kicked off my whole journey with you, it's related to the Ben video. I'm putting all this links in the show notes, by the way, but it's The Moral Molecule. It's another great book. So check that out. But most definitely go to the website. And boy, oh boy, what did I miss? What else do you want my folks to know? Was it
Thank
thorough?
you for your great work. And I think that's brilliant. These sensing videos are just brilliant. Why would you do this live? Even if you practice and rehearse it, why not craft this thing? I think it's wonderful. So again, the beauty of the common law, right? We're going to look at shades of variation, and
Yeah.
why don't we lean into
The
that?
critics say it's manipulative, and I say I like your word. It's influence. I mean, isn't all of law persuasion? I mean, what's the difference? I'm trying to persuade you to come to this decision. I
All
don't
of
know.
life is persuasion, right?
All of life is persuasion. If you look at, I know we're ending, but just look at these sensing memos. What's the difference? You're editing, you're re-editing, you're cutting, you're moving this thing here, you're moving that thing there. Hopefully you've got people to read it and tell you how bad it is. Most of these lawyers clearly do not, but I just don't see any significant difference. I'm a documentary filmmaker. The word document is right there in the word. This is a legal document. It just so happens to be visual.
Yeah.
So
and again, for listeners, you get so much more impact on the brain when it's video with audio than someone speaking or someone writing. You just have bigger impact. So therefore, your influence is going to be higher, from the get-go.
this is part 2 of our amazing time together. Dr. Zach was kind enough to run a hunk of a sentencing mitigation video through the Immersion platform. We got the results back. Pretty freaking incredible, but I wanted him to come back on and explain it all to us. So take it away.
Thanks, Doug. And so again, for listeners, immersion measures the value the brain assigns to an experience second by second, which allows you to, again, edit that for higher impact. So when the brain values it, it motivates action. It is able to influence people's opinions and behaviors. And that's the way we built Immersion, was to be a prediction engine and not a feeling engine. And yet the drivers of that are attention to the stimulus and the emotional resonance with it. You've got to actually care about the experience. So we ran this through our panel, and we found that there's a clip of one of the sentencing videos, not the whole thing, about 3 minutes, was actually good. It was around on the average. So the immersion data are normed to run from 0 to 100. And this ran around a 55. So just about the average for short form video. Couple other interesting things we found. One was that 20% of the population just dug it. This is their thing, right? This is like really impactful. So these are your influential people on a jury. These are people who are going to talk about this if it's an advertisement. So I think that's important. Another 20% were just checked out, just kind of didn't do it for them. And the rest of the people were in the middle. So again, that's what we expect for something that's, kind of around the average. The breakdown by different groups is, to me, really interesting. And again, this is a moderate sample size, so we don't want to, bet someone's life on this, which potentially could happen. Much more.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Dr. Zach, were you sharing your screen yet, or this is all set up?
I'm not. I'm chatting.
Okay. I want to make sure because I'm not seeing anything. So I just want to, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
It's all about me. You gotta look at me.
All right.
Right. So Another issue is, who's going to support, a weaker or stronger sentence for this individual. And so we found that the most immersed individuals were white. They tended to be younger, 18 to 25. Um, on the bottom side, they tend to have kind of moderate incomes, 60 to $80,000 a year. And we had a slight bias towards Hispanics that were more influenced by this. Their brains valued it more. Who didn't care for this video? People make a really high income, individuals living in the Western US, and women were less likely to be influenced this. Again, not entirely clear why. So let's look at that second by second data. And now I'll share my screen with you. So it begins the second by second data. Again, this is color coded. So we identify parts of that video that were the most immersive. Those are in green. Parts that are around the average, those are in gray. And then parts where people were kind of checked out, and that's in red. So again, overall, this is good. We expect little parts to be, kind of these dips here are very typical. One of the important things here, Doug, is that it started very strong and it ended strong. So people tend to remember the peak emotional parts of an experience and the end of an experience. If there's a peak at the end, you get a double whammy. So in terms of influence, that peak at the end is actually very important, right? That's when there is a implicit or explicit call to action towards the end, typically. So if we're trying to influence sentencing decisions here, I'm gonna do that one more time. If we're trying to influence sentencing decisions, then having that peak at the end means that I put tension into these individuals' brains, and they're more likely to support this kind of reduced sensing that you're advocating.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
good. And even the checked out parts are quite short, right? So these data are always kind of a sine wave. When I immerse, it's metabolically costly, and I need a little neural recovery time. And so this is really a fine video. I'm going to switch
So
over. Yeah, go ahead. Ask your
you
question.
say, okay, so when you talk about these, the demographic of who's doing this platform, so then that was, so they've got to put all that in there. Whoever your test subject is, do they basically have to fill out their whole demographic background before they start doing this then?
Correct.
Okay. And so that's super interesting to me because we know the demographic. I mean, if this were a movie, it'd be a wide swath of demographic. But my videos are typically an audience of one. I know exactly my demographic. So I think that would be super helpful. But what I was most interested in is when you said not entirely clear why this doesn't resonate with women, doesn't resonate with people from the West, doesn't resonate resonates more with white or Hispanics. So that's, what do I do with that? If I
Right. So that's if you can identify those groups, and you could again ask everybody, but we know that liking or people's perception of influence, conscious perception, poorly predicts outcomes. And so by getting data out of the brainstem, we're getting objective, true. Does this actually feel like it's influencing my brain? Do I really care about this? And then it would be going to those groups and asking them, hey, it seems like this video was kind of interesting to you. Can you tell me why? And kind of digging into that. So for women, I think, there's always a safety issue for women. They're, always worried about safety. So it could be kind of a safety issue here. Why younger people? Why Caucasians? I don't know. I just know their brains really were highly valueless. I mean, they were really outliers, particularly whites. So I don't know. And it's a pretty diverse sample, by the way. So,
well, and just so people understand what we're talking about, because I'm going to put this link to this video in the show notes so you can see it, but the content is pretty hairy. I mean, this is a 78-year-old man who's charged with some pretty serious sexual offending in federal court. And so I imagine that's going to have an impact on the way people are reacting to this, just by virtue of the fact that it's really sensitive material, right?
Correct. Yeah, very much so. I'd like to actually look at this kind of peak part at the end and just play that, and let's see what seemed to be so important to these individuals.
So people have to go to the YouTube to watch this if you're listening, because you got to see this platform. It's so cool. It's linked just frame by frame to the video, so you can go to an exact part of the video, and it correlates with the immersion measurements.
They really enjoy doing this. What's the alternative? Living out on the street and probably getting killed? We love our boys, and we take great care of our boys and our girls. And what would the alternatives would be a lot worse. So I don't know why people try to continually judge us.
By the way, my guess is if you go to that earlier green zone that's also good immersion, it's going to be the same type of thing, which is these are undercover recordings from an agent who was posing as a guy who was trying to ensnare this dude into criminal activity. And he was saying all this really gross stuff about kids to try to get this guy to agree to go on his sex tourism trip to Mexico. It was all fake. It was a sting operation. But is that? I think that's the. Let me see if that's the same.
Yeah. Can I play this part? Let's see.
Yeah, let's see that. Oh, interesting. Okay, stop that for a sec, would you?
Yeah.
Mostly because I'm worried YouTube's gonna hear that music and it's not copyrighted, and they're not gonna let me post this thing on YouTube.
Okay.
But what's super interesting, Dr. Zach, is that is a high immersion point, and there's no dialogue. It is solely a visual. It's an image of a brain with overlapping text that show all the things going on in my client, which also is kind of interesting, since you're the brain guy, that I actually have a video with a brain in there.
Isn't
And that video of the brain is a huge high immersion point in this.
And so these, for viewers, these bright intensity spots are very small strokes in the brain. So this is very common as people age. This gentleman was, I think, in his mid-70s, Doug, if you remember.
High 70s. He was 78.
So
yeah.
He probably had hypertension. Hypertension leads to these mini strokes are called lacunae. And those strokes, particularly in frontal lobe, diminish our ability to suppress impulses. And so someone says, hey, let's go to Vegas. And you're like, well, I think I have something to do. Like, okay, let's just go.
And that was a big part of our mitigation, was that he was making these choices. He's never been in trouble a day in his life, and all of a sudden he's doing these crazy crap. And these ischemia or these lesions were part of that story. But I'm so fascinated because this is not anyone talking. It's just an image of the brain with text over it, and people were really into it.
Yeah, let's see if we can play
any
that
thoughts on why that
so that
might
you won't
be
get in trouble. Yeah. And probably something comes up after that. But this is, in my view, very mitigating evidence. And also his wife died, so there's no one there to kind of, bounce ideas off of. And, that's any of us who have, older parents or grandparents, that is a real recipe for disaster, where you're much more influenced. You just want kind of human connection. And then someone, says something, and all of a sudden, you're doing what you should be doing.
And that's the first segue into those
recordings,
gross undercover recordings, but they don't come up until the end of that immersion peak, and then it goes into the gray area.
Well, part of this, I think, Doug, is just to be honest with you, beautiful storytelling, right? That you've actually structured this in a way that gets people to this point where now you've set up the problem, you set up who this gentleman is, and then you have evidence. That's, in this case, the brain scan. And then you have this very influential recording for these undercover agents. And, it's just it's a terrible situation. Can you tell us actually what happened with the sentencing?
Yeah, it was a phenomenal result. So, these videos, I always say, are like the exclamation point at the end of a very long sentence. So keep in mind that there was a lot of accompanying materials, a very detailed sentencing memo that fleshed out the story, psychological evaluations, all the stuff that we do. But we went before the judge, and it was a pretty notoriously harsh sentencer. And we were real worried about it. We had a choice, by the way, because he had some charges that would have resulted in a mandatory minimum of 5 years, but I convinced the prosecutor to drop those charges. But he actually, in so doing, pled to a more serious count But the reason we did it is because the judge had more discretion because there were no mandatory minimums. So the guidelines were much higher. They were 11 to 14 years. And the prosecutor was recommending, I think, like 12 years. And the probation office was recommending the same. And the judge gave him 2 years, 24 months. So, you know, with good time and everything else, he probably served like 18 months, and he didn't die in prison. Phenomenal result for this person. I mean, I don't know that there's any sentence that's been as low as that for these types of offenses, at least in our district. So that was a pretty good result.
Game. Yeah. So it helps me understand as an outsider the whole universe of evidence that you bring to bear on these sentencing decisions, and what a high stakes game this is. This poor gentleman could, I mean, he did something wrong, right? I'm not saying in my view, but he was just goaded into it. And my father's 90 years old, and you know, he's kind of with it, but I think if he had persuasive younger people saying, "Oh, this is going to be great fun," he'd probably do it. Who knows?
And it's just a tantamount. It's just a testament to how important narrative is in the law, because you look at the charges, you automatically go to a place of, this is a monster, this is a horrible human being, he's a dangerous person who deserves to be locked up for as long as possible, and then you hear the story, and it changes everything, you know.
And I think you think, you know, there, but the grace of God go I, right? I mean, it could happen to any of us.
Yeah. Well, is there more on the platform that you think we should look at?
I mean, most of it. I think, you know,
absolutely incredible, man. This is so cool. Can we talk about? Well, I had a question, because in the narrative, Jim, you know, Randy talks about the ABT and the story structure, and he talks about it in the context of music, and he uses Carly Rae Jepsen's song "Call Me Maybe" or whatever that is. And it got me thinking, because I'm a musician and I have friends that are musicians. My recollection is, when we talked last time, video is more powerful than audio. But what would happen if we uploaded a song to this thing? Same deal?
Doug Passon, you are a very smart neuroscientist. Yeah, so we have found that changing the music for the same clip can vary immersion by 50%. It makes a huge impact.
Oh, wow.
So picking the right music is going to be very important. And tell me something, how do you, so this clip had music with it. How do you choose that music? Is there a science to it? I mean, you're a musician, so you probably have much more experience than other people.
Well, there's a science to it now. But no, it's a vibe. So this was a video that I did very early on, and we stole shamelessly, you know, these are that, I don't know if you noticed that portion with the strings, but that was a string version of "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones. Which I don't know if that was a good choice or not, but the vibe, I chose it for the vibe, and really that's what we're asking for. But you know, I think I was a little up my own ass with my art with those music choices. Plus, now now that I've went further down the road in filmmaking, I have access to, you know, rights, music, a whole database of any kind of music for any kind of feeling and any kind of vibe and any kind of thing, and I have, you know, rights to it. It's I'm doing it legit. So when I pick the music, first of all, I don't always include music. I want to, because I know how powerful it can be for immersion, but we always run the risk that judges are going to feel like we're doing something overly manipulative with this process. So we try not to be too out front about it. But there's very few movies that we know of ever. I think in your book, actually, you mentioned No Country for Old Men as, and that's like the only movie I've ever, and I didn't even remember that had no music.
Right.
But every movie you're ever going to see has a soundtrack, right? And there's a reason for that.
That emotional feeling, exactly right.
Yeah. And that kind of blew me away when I read that. And I was like, you're right. There was no music in that. But that was deliberate too, to evoke a feeling, a desolate, bleak, you know, this is a movie about just the bleakness of humanity, right?
Right.
So then the Coen brothers are brilliant. When I choose my music, I try to be not as in your face as I was with that clip. And I just go for tone. There's no rhyme or reasons, and there's no science. I'm just going for a feeling that helps push the story a little bit further on down the road. But now I can toy with this and try different pieces of music over the video. And you're saying that might give me some clues to immersion.
Yeah, and I think, I've seen databases of music or music clips that have the associated emotion that people think it evokes. So dismal or joyful
Yeah.
or yeah, I mean that would be very interesting and maybe test out on a couple of things. So Doug, I want to be of service to you. So next time you're working on one of these, I
Yeah.
guess they're semi-private and our panel is public, but at least on a couple people privately, I could actually just measure it and give you feedback. Like give me three different versions. I would love
Okay.
to be part of your solution.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. I'll totally take you up on that. And
Oh,
to put the music one step further, so put the sensing video aside. If I wrote a song and I wanted to test the song, could I just put a song on the platform and would that measure immersion in the same way?
it would because it evokes that emotional response. We actually, again, you're like reading my mind, which is scary because a lot of empty space in there. That we have a paper in review at a scientific journal in which we can use immersion only and predict with 98% accuracy 3 months in advance which songs are hits and which are going to be flops. And this was done in collaboration with a music streaming service, and they chose the definition of hits and flops. So we didn't rig the data in any way.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, even in the first minute of that musical score or song, we're still in the sort of mid 80% accuracy range. And I can't, again, really tell you why that is. If it's a good song, it's a good song. It's a good song. I guess our brain just knows it.
Last question I have for you is about cost structure. Can we talk about that a little bit? For somebody who wants to really like test a 10-minute video or something like that. So the website says 40 cents per second. Right? Is that right?
Per
Okay.
brain, right, exactly.
Okay, 40 cents per second per brain. Okay, so that just depends on how long your clip is and how many brains you can get engaged.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can get a very clear signal with, 12, 15 brains. If you really want statistical significance, you need about 35. Uh,
Okay.
and 10 minutes is long, right, for a lot of clips. So, yeah, so for, 150
Yeah.
bucks, you can
Yeah.
get signal.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so amazing. I did have one other question, but it's about the wearables. Do you have a certain set list of wearable technology that's actually going to work with this?
We do. We support about 15 different wearables, Whoop, Halo, Apple Watch, Samsung Galaxy. So the list is on the website. You can find it at getimmersion.com. So it's software. It's not has nothing to do with the hardware. So it's all in the cloud. That's why it happens so fast.
That is just so cool. So cool. And yeah, for people that we're an inherently skeptical bunch, lawyers, like scientists are too, but for people that are skeptics, go to the website. This is peer reviewed. I'm, I'm a little small potato, but you've got you've got big potatoes that are really using this technology and have great faith in it, right?
Yeah, I was.
Movies.
If you're a small potato, you're an important potato. So love all
I'm
our
just
potatoes.
I'm just saying this is the real deal and it's really freaking cool. And I think even if it's not a video, I think you could, if you're a lawyer and you want to deliver a closing argument, something like that. We do PowerPoint sometimes at sentencing, which I think are deadly dull, but people do it. This isn't just for sentencing videos. There's any number of ways that you could test to see if you're hitting the right notes, the right emotional notes.
If
So
CEOs are being trained using this, why shouldn't lawyers be trained to have a bigger impact?
absolutely, absolutely. All right, well, getimmersion.com and check out The Moral Molecule. I love that book. And your latest book, Immersion, right?
Immersion, the science of the
Immersion.
extraordinary and the source of happiness.
Yeah, and that's what goes into the deep dive on this new technology and this amazing platform. So, Dr. Paul Zach, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for me and for the world, and I know we'll be talking soon.
And same to you, Doug. You're really a legend. Thanks.
Take care, man. Thank you. That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.